My name is Peter, and this is my story from the Seoul. I'm half Korean and half British. I was actually born in Hong Kong because my father was in the British Army, and so he met my mother in Seoul, and then they were posted to Hong Kong, and that's where I was born. But I left when I was about a year old, so I don't actually have any memories of growing up in Hong Kong. And then we moved to London, which is where I was brought up, right the way through university as well, growing up on the barracks for the first part of my life. And my dad as a soldier was posted away quite often, actually. So for maybe a few months at a time, my dad would be away and it would be me and my mum living on the barracks by ourselves. And to be honest, when my mum first went to the UK, her English was not great because at the time, back in the 70s and the 60s when she was going to school in Korea, English education was not their strong point. So she used to talk to me a lot in Korean, and we'd spend a lot of time just together, me and my mum at home. And obviously when I went to school, I'd interact with all the British kids. And yeah, I just was living in and around London my whole school life and university life, although my dad did leave the army when I was about 10 years old, so then we moved out of the barracks kind of atmosphere, but still stayed close by in North London and West London areas. I went to university in London as well, so I didn't leave home. That was partly because of my Korean mother. I'm an only child, and she wanted me to stay as close to home as possible, so I didn't even move out. I just stayed at home throughout my university years. And after that is when I first moved to Korea after I graduated, just for about 6 months to test out the waters, kind of like a mini gap year. Yeah, I'd say I was really close to both my mother and my father growing up and as an adult as well. My father actually passed away about 3-4 years ago. But yeah, when I was growing up, I mentioned that my father wasn't at home for maybe 3-4 month stretches, up to maybe 6 months when I was younger. And so I'd spend less time with him. But yeah, whenever he came home, he was like the typical dad. He'd wrestle with his son and buy board games. But with my mum, yeah, I was super close when we were growing up because she didn't have a good grasp of English. So she would rely on me a lot of the times to communicate with other people when we're out at the shops in the barracks and stuff like that. And when we're at home, she'd always talk to me in Korean, so I naturally picked it up. She never sat me down and taught me Korean, so I didn't learn to read or write actually until I was an adult, because my mum would just speak at me in Korean and I'd respond in Korean. She'd shout at me in Korean like a typical Korean mother. She'd smack me like a typical Korean mother as well. And I'm not afraid to say that because I have no ill will to her whatsoever for smacking me sometimes with wooden spoons. Mum, if you're watching, I'm sorry, but this is the truth, and that's what made me the guy I am today. I'm just a bit wary that I can't do that to my children anymore. That's illegal even here in Korea. She used to love coming back to Korea, and me too as well. So from a young age, because I was here, I would feel that Korean chong, that emotional attachment. That is the terrible way to describe it in English. But with my cousins, my aunties, my uncles, compared to my British family, who are also very nice, but they just weren't as warm. My cousins, they were all older than me as well, because my mother was the youngest and I was the youngest grandchild. They'd all pay me so much attention. They used to think I was like a little doll because I had these big eyes compared to their Korean features. And so that really helped me understand that I was also Korean, even though I was growing up in London, because she would religiously make that pilgrimage almost. Compared to London, it was so different as well, because London's this historic city which changes at a snail's pace, and then Korea was this hustle bustle. And I loved both places, but it was just so nice to grow up in almost two environments. Despite not living here as I was growing up in Seoul, I got to come so often, so I felt like it was part of me. Not necessarily home, but I could always be reminded that I was half Korean by that fact, by the fact that I also communicated with my mother in Korean. Another important point for me was I had a few half Korean friends, because as my mum grew up, she met a few more Korean mothers who were married to British guys, and so we had a little group of maybe 4 or 5 of us, all half British, half Korean, around the same age as well. but I really stuck out like a sore thumb amongst them because their mothers would speak English as much as possible. Like their English levels, I'm sure, were a little bit higher than my mum's when they came to the UK. And then they encouraged their kids as well to talk as much English as possible. Because back in the 80s, there used to be this weird like language theory. You'd confuse children if you speak two languages at home. And so they didn't speak any Korean. They hardly came back to Korea. And so when I talk about Korean or I talk in Korean to my mother, they'd be like, ooh, that's a bit odd, that's a bit weird. And I'd be like, wait, we're all half Korean. And I think from a young age, I felt that that was a little bit of a difference to other half Koreans, at least living in the UK. Well, as I've said, I was really like comfortable from a young age and really felt myself that I was half Korean and half English. My mother really did instill that in me, maybe not deliberately, but through always cooking Korean food at home. Like despite my father sometimes saying, oh, that smells a bit weird, I don't like that. She'd cook a separate English meal for him and sometimes for me. I was quite a fussy child actually. Just as a side note, I didn't eat like any vegetables at all, so a lot of Korean cuisine was off the table for me. Maybe the bulgogi and things like that I'd eat, but having felt half Korean from a young age, I didn't really feel any identity issues then because it was just normal to me, despite the fact that, most of my class at primary school and at nursery was like 100% British. Growing up on the barracks, it was mostly just British kids, in fact, mostly just English white kids. I got on really well with them as well. Like they never made me feel out of place. I think the first time I ever felt any kind of identity issue or like a bit of racism. Well, it was blatant racism. I went to a youth club when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, and there were lots of people from the council estate there. And in the UK, the council estate is where you'll get people who are on lower income and with lower education backgrounds. And so it can be quite a rough place to grow up in. So a lot of those kids, they were a little more tough than me. I was a bit of a wimp. I didn't get into many fights. So at the youth centre, I remember one time a kid like took me to the side and started calling me a Paki, so for Pakistani. And I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not from Pakistan. I know from how I look, no one thinks I'm half Korean. No one thinks I'm half British as well. Like people call me all sorts, not in a bad way. Like they just, when someone asks me where I'm from, number one, don't get offended at all by that. I'm always interested to know where people are from, and there's no like racial barb included in that. I always like to have fun and say, you guess, because I've heard so many things growing up. No one would ever get it right. So people would say maybe the Middle East or Hispanic places, South America, even Southeast Asia. So I've heard it all. And then this kid was just assuming, because I was different and I kind of had brown skin, he didn't know which category to put me in. I'm sure he didn't think I was Pakistani, but he didn't have any like lingo to call me what I really was. So he called me Paki and he bullied me a bit at that youth club. And I remember feeling really terrible. But at the time, if I'm totally honest, I felt worse that he was calling me Paki when I thought, I'm half British, I'm half Korean, I'm better than the Paki. And I know that sounds racist, and at the time it probably was, but there was this kind of hierarchy, I guess, and there still is, maybe subconsciously. I feel it more in Korea. They talk about like Hujinguk and Sonjinguk, so underdeveloped countries and developed countries, and you get treated differently for sure here in Korea depending on where you're from. And still in many places of the world that still rings true. So that was the first time. After that, when I was in secondary school, there was just a lot of joking with friends, and these were people I was close to. But one guy introduced me to the term by calling it to me, gook. And I was like, what's a gook? Like, I'd never even heard of it. And then I looked into, like, what gook meant. He was like, it's like all Asian people, like Japanese, Chinese, Korean. And I'm sure he wasn't trying to hurt my feelings. But then I looked into it and realized, like, Hanguk. And I think it came from, like, American soldiers when they were in Korea, hearing the word gook, 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 Hanguk, weregook, migook, that kind of thing. And it didn't hurt my feelings, but I realized, oh yeah, you guys, all my friends were white English kids. And then I guess I was conscious for the first time that maybe I was a bit different and they were looking at me differently to the other white English friends. I didn't feel out of place or anything, but it was just kind of a like, ooh, moment. Conversely, in Korea and identity issues, when I was younger, there were hardly any foreigners in Korea apart from like the American soldiers and forces and their kids. And so whenever I came, I could understand Korean. People would always talk about me, around me, but 그 외국인 좀 봐, 그 미국 사람 봐, which means look at that foreigner, look at that American. And then I'd also get offended. I'd be like, I'm not American, 나 영국 사람이야. And I'd say that with such pride and such arrogance, I suppose, when I was growing up. And it was just, obviously Koreans didn't know the difference. And I definitely don't look completely British, so I didn't have any ill will. But I just realised then as well, okay, I'm not totally fitting in Korea. I'm not totally fitting in the UK. But I kind of embraced that, and I really liked that as well. I liked the kind of exoticness of being from two places. And I don't think I've ever had any proper identity issues where I felt really upset or torn between two cultures. More that there's so many more benefits to being from two places. So I came to live in Korea permanently in 2008, having been here for 6 months after graduating in 2004, because I just missed Korea so much after I went to the UK. I worked in a Korean company because I wanted to come out here as much as possible back in London, so I came out on a few business trips, and then I was like, okay, I'm making the permanent move. I had already met my wife-to-be in the UK in 2007. She was studying English there, and a mutual friend introduced us. And although we weren't a couple or anything like that, we were just good friends. I came to Korea for a holiday that previous winter, like 2007 becoming 2008, that New Year's, and we really hit it off speaking Korean for the first time, because in the UK our mutual friend told us only speak English so that your wife can improve her English. Obviously she wasn't my wife at the time, and so that played a big role, obviously just being a bit romantic and wanting to see where that relationship would lead. But I also knew that I wanted to be in Korea for at least a few years at that time, and so I made the move in 2008 and started working at a friend's company in sports marketing, but quickly realized that wasn't really my thing, working in a Korean company environment. And I had some time to kill, so I went to an 어학당, a language institute, to improve some reading and writing skills for Korean. And while I was there, I saw an ad from TBS EFM, the English-speaking radio station here, just for a guest position, and I just applied like anyone would, and met a producer at the station, and they were like, yeah, sure, be a guest on our show. Because I'd worked in sports marketing, initially they used me as a sports expert on a morning show there. Then luckily, through some people I met at TBS, they introduced me to the other stations like Arirang and EBS, the education broadcasting system. And again, I'd start off as a guest and eventually work my way up to host positions. And since then, it's been broadcasting all the way pretty much. I've realized it's something I really like to do, just being myself and talking on air and teaching Korean to maybe foreigners and teaching English to Koreans. And then about the cultures, that's the real fun bit for me, because I feel I've had a foot in each culture since I was young. And there's not too many, in my experience, half kids who really had that from a young age. And so talking about that on air, especially, I think my expertise is as an English speaker, a fluent English speaker, explaining Korean culture to the rest of the world. And these days, with the whole buzz around BTS and all this Korean movies doing well, like at Cannes and stuff like this, I feel like there's a real demand for this at the moment too. And I'm just lucky to be in this position, to be able to talk about Korea to everyone out there. And I also really enjoy speaking Korean on air. Despite that not being a completely fluent language, I feel like Korean audiences, they really like to embrace it. If you're half Korean and you really speak Korean well and you don't look Korean, that's a little bit of a touchy subject. But yeah, if you don't have a Korean face and you speak good Korean, then people are like, wow, that's amazing, how do you do it? Whereas some of my half Korean friends who look very Korean, if their Korean is not as bad as mine, but a little bit worse than mine, they might get admonished for that. People go, why can't you speak Korean? You are Korean. So I just guess I fell on the lucky side of the coin there, and that's something that I hope to do more of in the future as well. I feel really lucky, and the way I've been treated by the vast majority of Koreans, 99.9%, has been a totally positive experience. But that's just the luck of the draw for me, because I have a white British father and a Korean mother. And so when people first meet me and then they speak Korean to me, they're like, how do you speak Korean? And then that story will be, oh, my father's from the UK, but my mother's from Korea. And they're like, wow, British gentleman, and all these cultural stereotypes that Britain has kind of forged over the centuries. And that has benefited me to a great extent. So I have no complaints about the way I've been treated by Koreans, but I also see the other side of the coin. Like, if you're half Korean and half Southeast Asian or something like that, there is still a good deal of racism left and negative images about certain countries. And so for me, what I'd like to tell Koreans is definitely not for my benefit, because I benefit more than enough, but for the other multicultural families in Korea that may be struggling. We're all Korean, you know. I now don't like to say that I'm half Korean, half British. I just like saying I'm British and Korean, you know. It's just a mix of things there. And, you know, when you're abroad and you meet another Korean, like, just say you're both 100% Korean, you're so 반가워, we say in Korean, right? You're so glad to see another Korean in a foreign environment. And it's this real bond between Koreans that seems to exist, all part of that jong, that emotional attachment. And I reckon if you were abroad and you met someone who was half Korean and, let's say, I don't know, half Indonesian, then you'd still be really happy to see them, right? So I think rather than focusing on the otherness of the other half, for Koreans, the message I'd want to send out is, yeah, you're both Korean. Even if this person is only half Korean and half whatever, you're both Korean. So focus on that part of it, you know, focus on being the same and that oneness rather than the otherness and the differences. And I heard some crazy statistics recently, like within a few years' time, maybe a third of kids born in Korea are going to be multicultural in some way. So that is the future, because Korea's birth rate is declining and there's lots more multicultural kids, and that's going to be the norm very, very soon. So hopefully we can all embrace that. And that's just my feeling in general. Like, we're all people at the end of the day, not just Koreans or Brits or anything. We're all just humans. Let's just get along. Let's not have any kind of negativity about being not pure-blooded or whatever. It has been a homogeneous society for a very long time, but now I think it's time to embrace the changes and that diversity that it brings. I think it's really enriching the culture rather than like sullying it or anything.